Today on Azure in the Enterprise, we're going to install WSL on Windows 11, Visual Studio Code, Git, and then from within the Linux distribution, we'll actually install the Azure CLI and connect to the Azure portal. All right, thanks for joining us. Let's go ahead and get started. So as you can see, we've got our Windows 11 machine sitting here. And so the first thing we're going to do is actually install WSL. So you can search on the internet for this. I've got a quick link right here that we'll get to. And as you notice, with Windows 11, it's a lot easier. You essentially just install via command line on an elevated prompt. So if we copy here, type in command and do a Control-Shift-Enter, or you can come down here and click Run as Administrator. Go ahead and hit yes, or type in your credentials as you need to. Paste that in, wait for a minute. All right, now that we're installed, let's go ahead and reboot. All right, after we've logged back in, you'll see some stuff running here. It's actually just going and installing the distribution, and it's going to ask us to set up a username and password here in just a second. So once we're all set here, go ahead and set something up for yourself. It does not have to be the same as your Windows username and password. It's really up to you here. Okay, after you have that, there's a couple nice things to just touch base on here. The first, as it's noted here, is to just touch the Hush login file so you don't see a lot of this stuff every day. If you want, you can keep it. Otherwise, you just do touch Hush login, and you won't see that pop up anymore. The other thing that you want to do right off the bat is just update. And so for this, there's just two commands here. You run sudo apt get update, and you can inline a second command, sudo apt get -y upgrade. So that just go ahead and suppresses the do you want to upgrade prompt, and you go ahead and run it. Type in your password and let it run. And once we've got that, the next thing we're going to do is just go ahead and put in the Azure CLI into the Linux distro. So for that, get over here to how to install the Azure CLI, and you can see here install on Linux with the WSL. We are using Ubuntu, so we're going to go ahead and come over here. And the suggestion here is just to install with one command. There's a bunch of step-by-step, but you can also just copy this. The aka.ms link actually just redirects to a script from Microsoft and pipes it to bash. All right, now that we've got that, make sure Azure CLI is installed, so you can see here you're set there. The other thing you can do here is just configure the Azure CLI. I like to do this because the default settings are an output of JSON, so if you're doing stuff via the CLI and trying to look around, it's a little harder than the table format. So that's the only thing that I typically change. And we'll see when you're doing scripting to pull values and things, you're going to use an output of TSV anyway to put that into other variables. So I just like the default of table, so that way you can see things when you're working around Azure. So the next thing we're going to grab, we've got two things left to do, is grab Visual Studio Code and Git. Now I prefer Visual Studio Code inside it just because it's still extremely stable, but also you kind of get some other updates a little faster. So it's code, visualstudio.com, insiders, And you want to grab the user installer here. Let that go. And then the last thing here is just to grab Git. And you'll see here in the installer, it's actually going to ask you what editor you want to use as Git's default editor. So you can choose Visual Studio Code if you have that, or Insiders as I'm using on this. And you can just go ahead and click through next on these for the defaults. All right, now that we've got all of that, we've got Visual Studio Code, we've got the Azure CLI installed, we've got WSL installed, and we have Git installed. What we're going to do here is actually go ahead and launch Visual Studio Code. And once we're in here, and you'll notice when Visual Studio Code starts up, it'll always be checking for updates. So you may have a background update a couple times a month, once a month, depending on what is going on in Insiders. So the first thing you want to do is you can actually go hit a Control-A to bring up a command prompt terminal. So you can see here, since we're on Windows, we have not started to connect this to WSL. We're inside of Windows. So what we want to do here is go to Extensions and type in a remote. And you can see remote WSL. So what this is going to do is allow Visual Studio Code to talk to the Linux subsystem that's going on in Windows. And you can even see here when we open up Windows Explorer after we enable WSL, you can actually go browse the Linux distributions that are installed. So you can come into Home, you can see that there's a username I created. We could go ahead and create a file in there like we'll do in a second. So once you have WSL installed, you'll see this other little tab here, Remote Explorer. So you can see the distros here, and if you hit the plus sign, it will actually connect to that distro, and you can open a folder in the distro. So if I come over here, we can see I'm in a home for my directory. I can come into here and say new folder, look at me. And then I can actually come in here and see I'm connected remote. So I can actually go here and we can see, look at me here. So we're just going to go ahead and open the root folder here just so we can see it. The first time you open up any folder in WSL, it's going to ask you if you trust the authors in this folder. What that allows you to do is if you're grabbing some Git repo or something else and you don't quite trust it, or if you're doing some work, you can set that level and it'll help you be a little safer. So now if we hit the Control-A, we'll see here we're actually in Linux, not in Windows. So we're running Visual Studio Code on the Windows host, but we're actually connecting and working and playing in Linux in WSL. So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and do the next thing, which is go ahead and log into our Azure subscription. All right, so we've got Lyle.demo with Outlook. We're going to have login here. And now you can see it's going to actually authenticate here and bring up our subscription. So I can do an AZ group list, see that there's nothing in there right now. If I come back over here to the portal, let's go to portal.azure.com. We can see here there are no resource groups. And if I come over here, I can do an AZ group create, and this is the resource group is what we'll create. That will be the container for all of this stuff. So we can say name demo, location US East 2. I always mess this up. And you can see here when I mess that up, it was a really friendly help message, so you can actually go see the locations that I can go provision in. Okay, so we've gone and created this, and we can go over here and hopefully, there we go. So we've got our subscription connected. You can also go grab some other extensions. So if you come in here to the marketplace, you can see the extensions that we're installing now are all connected to WSL. So it's going to put them all in the Linux distro connected to Visual Studio Code through there through remote. So GitLens is super popular. You can also come in here and look for Azure. You'll get a whole list of stuff from Microsoft. So the Azure tools, there's an Azure account, which will put a bunch of stuff over here on the left that actually allows you to browse the Azure portal and a bunch of other things. The other thing, so the Azure account, Azure CLI tools, there's a bunch of really good suggested stuff in here. Also the docs authoring pack is a really great thing to use. So if you're going to be doing Markdown, go ahead and grab this. It's going to go grab a bunch of stuff. It's going to go grab some YAML schema validation, a bunch of other things to go create and do stuff in docs. Go ahead and hit install in WSL Ubuntu, and then you're off and running. So that's it for this one. Fairly short one. We'll go ahead and do a bunch more in subsequent videos. Thanks for joining.